Hello, this is John from Samples to Symphonies. Suppose you have a motif or short melody that you think might become the big tune of your composition. How do you explore the space of possible orchestrations, different instrument combinations, pitch levels, dynamics? At least for what Walter Piston calls Type 4 orchestration, part writing, there is a way to map out that exploration. I've done this with tunes of my own. You heard one playing just then. But for this demo, I'm going to use something well known, Shenandoah. We start with just the melody and chords. Shenandoah is a folk song turned sea shanty, but for this method we need to treat it as a chorale, that's to say something that we start work on by harmonising into 4 parts. Here's my attempt at that, working at a keyboard. I can't do voice leading in my head, no funky chords, just a few suspensions and passing notes. Now we're going to develop this into an orchestral piece. Even though the final version probably won't have a choir, a nice place to start is by extracting the 4 voices from the piano score into soprano, alto, tenor and bass lines. Each voice part is simply pulled from the appropriate line in the piano score. Here, for example, is the alto line, and then there it is in the piano, and similarly the tenor line is pulled from the top line in the bass staff of the piano. Now we want immediately to think about phrasing and dynamics, treating each voice in its own right, working out the best way, or at least a first pass of the best way, to enunciate, to deliver that particular line. This is what I came up with. Notice that I'm using hairpins for all except the starting dynamic. That's to save time later. Now, let's bring up the mixer so we can just solo the vocals and hear an a cappella choir. So we'll move over. Here they are. We'll solo sopranos, solo altos, solo tenors, solo basses. Now we have voice parts that we can assign to instruments. Let's start with the strings. We're going to let them use the voices in multiple ways by having 2 sections of first violins, 2 of second violins, 2 of violas, 2 of cellos and just 1 of contrabasses. This doesn't necessarily mean that the sections are divided or divisi. We might well end up choosing to mute one of the 2 lines. We'll think of there being a main version of each of the string sections where the roles are traditional and an alternative version where they're a bit mixed up. For most of the strings I have the upper stave showing the main version. The exception is the first violins where the alternative I want them to play is an octave higher than the main version, so I've put that line at the top. Just looking up briefly at the choir, there's the soprano line, that's the line that I copy into the second stave for the violins and an octave higher into the first stave. And then similarly I take the voice lines for alto, the second violins take the straight alto line and the second set of violas The supplementary violas take that same line but an octave lower. Similarly, I treat the tenors. The tenors go into the first line of violas and an octave higher go into the second violins. Meanwhile, the cellos have the bass line in their first stave, and in the second it's the melody an octave down. The contrabasses are just doubling the cellos, an octave lower. So now let's listen to the main versions of the strings. So that's to say the top stave in all cases except for the violins, where it's the second stave, and hear what that string choir sounds like. Now let's add in the supplementary string lines. There's the octave higher violin, that could add a silvery texture that we might mix alongside the main section, or some other instruments that are carrying the melody in a lower register, and then the other second violins, violas, and cellos too. I'll play all of these at once. So that was simulating divisi strings, a thicker texture, and you see I'm just now taking those solos off the strings for later playback. Now let's zoom out a little. We'll look at how arranging the other instruments into not quite conventional sections or choirs and then assigning voice parts appropriately gives us a full score. Let's zoom in again. We'll come to the top of the score and begin with a single flute that we'll give the melody to. So here's the soprano line copied in. Below that is a single clarinet, and it's just going to play in the shallow register, which is very clarinet-ish, so it doesn't overlap in tone very much with the flute. That's the clarinet's low register, and the tenor line fits in well. A full choir of double reed instruments, oboe soprano, cor anglais alto, then two bassoons. And then we move down to a French horn choir, providing soprano, alto and tenor. Below that, a choir of heavy brass. I thought I could try 4-part trombones, but it's more conventional to put trumpet on the soprano, 2 trombones for the middle parts, and then tuba on bass. So those are my separate instrument choirs. Let's use Musesounds facility for selecting individual instruments to have a quick listen to one of the choirs, the double reed choir. We select those instruments in the first bar and play back. Now to explore different registers and dynamic levels during repeats of the tune, which means copying, pasting and modifying. If you have a melody or motif that modulates, you can automatically go to the new key center for a repeat. Shenandoah doesn't modulate, so we're going to take each successive repeat a semitone higher. We're not composing a finished work, we're exploring textures, so moving up a semitone isn't cheesy, it's a simple systematic way to explore. So far as varying dynamics goes, The advantage of just moving up and down with hairpins during the melody is when you repeat, you can move the whole dynamic up or down. There are only a few explicit PPs to change. So, step by step, duplicate the block we have so far, put the original and its clones side by side, do that again and again and you have 6 copies. Fix the starting dynamics to get louder each time and transpose each successive block up at semitone. Then copy that block of 6 starting back at PP so there'll be 2 crescendos in all, and transpose up the second big block to visit the remaining key centres. After all that, go into every individual part and adjust each repetition to play in the best range for the instrument. Sometimes that means the instrument taking the soprano role sounds lower than the one taking the alto role in the same choir. No problem. Let's start the playback of the whole thing, and as we do so I'll be working the mixer, first of all to take out the piano and the vocal choir, and then doing variations. It's likely you've heard this tune enough times, so I'm going to continue talking over as it moves through the dynamics and from key to key. The chorale-like harmonisation means we could cut lots of instruments. So long as we maintain at least one on each of the 4 lines, we may not have a Rimsky-Korsakov level orchestration, but with balancing we have something that probably will work. The subtitle of this video is 190 million orchestrations, because that's the number of different combinations you can get by muting parts while ensuring that there's always at least one top line, one alto line, a tenor line and a bass line. Of course you can fade parts too, which gives even more nuance. Let's listen just for a few more bars. And I hope you're hearing why this video is called Timbre Flow. Orchestral blend isn't static. It isn't simply that going through instrument choices, registers and dynamics yields different mixes or blends or tones or timbres. It's that on a note-by-note basis, different instruments have varying strengths in different parts of their range, so moment by moment you hear a particular instrument come slightly into prominence or a blend that seems unique morphing into a new blend. This is one of the beauties of orchestral music.